Hello everybody, Strategic Sage here with some more AI War 2 thoughts. There probably isn't anybody who's played the game for a significant length of time who hasn't run into a situation where a particular game was more or less difficult than they expected. While some games have no difficulty settings at all, others have a handful and you can tweak certain optional rules. It's quite unusual to have a game such as AI War where there are so many levers you can tweak and they interact with each other in unexpected ways in many cases. So my hope here is to provide some guidance in being able to set up your own games with an appropriate level of challenge for your skill. So let's take a look at some specific considerations. First up, what's the generic, vanilla baseline? Well, for every faction except for the AI, it's 5. But 7 for the AI, and that's because that's the point at which, as you can see the tooltip here, the AI stops holding back, it's not playing suboptimally. Then another pretty much universal thing that you can count on is the higher the difficulty level is, the more ships, resources, etc. a faction is going to have. In the AI's case, we are going to have twice as much resources in economy if you're at difficulty 7 as you do if you're in difficulty 5. If you're at difficulty 8, it's 50% more than 7. Difficulty 9 is 2/3 more than 8, and difficulty 10 is 80% more than 9. So there's a somewhat exponential scaling up of all that. Another way of looking at that is difficulty 10 is 4.5 times the income of difficulty 7. Where it gets a little more complicated is trying to understand how all the settings interrelate, and also what impact on the challenge of the game you're going to have if you have a bunch of different factions involved in a setup. So consider this map as just basically a control. Difficulty 7, realistic, 80 planets, we've all seen these maps before. Here's the AI homeworld, and everything within 2 hops is Mark 6 or higher. But there are also 3 that are over here at Mark 6. And most of the rest in here are Mark 3, Mark 4, some Mark 5, etc. Here's difficulty 9. Same exact seed. This all looks the same. You've still got a bunch of Mark 3, Mark 4 around here, maybe a few more Mark 5, but look at the Mark 6s. There's another one here, another one here, and one more over here. So you've got 6 Mark 6s outside of the AI's core area, whereas in the Mark 7, or the difficulty 7 rather, map, you only had 3. Most of the mark levels for the maps still going to be the same. What does a few matter? Well, let's say you're fighting against a additional faction that requires quick action. Obvious examples would be Scourge or Antagonizers, others to a lesser extent. The chance of you getting blocked off from something you really need to get to in this type of scenario is actually a fair bit higher. And so this can make the Scourge or Antagonist feel a lot more dangerous, but they're actually not in and of themselves. You've just multiplied the difficulty, essentially, by changing the AI difficulty, something completely different. And there are other examples of this kinds of thing, many of them. For example, the one-way door master, you're trying to expand quickly, the black hole machine's definitely going to be an obstacle to that. Quadratic is a good one that can be sort of very plus or minus. If you want a quick game, it can actually be helpful. You're not going to be able to attack as much at the beginning. On the other hand, if you're doing a long game, the waves are going to be very powerful, and that can be a huge issue later on. If you were to choose, for example, the Vicious Raider, you would really have to pay attention to your defensive scenarios early on. As I've seen, the Special Forces Master is very much a pain if you're not careful to deal with them properly. Golemite would make it very difficult to attack, etc. Then there are things like the fact that you've got your difficulty setting for the Hunter and Warden fleet, and then you've got their intelligence under the fleet type, affecting their behavior, all of that you can tweak. But then if you upgrade the main difficulty of the AI to 8 or above, they're going to get bonus ships and higher cap for the Warden and Hunter. So even if you take the baseline of difficulty 5 Intelligent Predator, difficulty 5 base oriented, you tweak the AI difficulty, and that's still going to affect these to some degree as well. Turning to the other factions, I think it's important to categorize a bit, because some of them are not going to have much interplay at all. They simply add what they add, regardless of what else is in your game. In other cases, the challenge they present is going to vary greatly depending on what else is there. So if you look at the Wanderers, I'll call them, the Zenith Trader and the Devour Golem, they're not going to look to take territory. We don't have a difficulty setting, just, whether they're hostile or not on the Devour Golem and nothing at all on the Trader. They're there, they do what they do, and they're not impacted by other elements. Then you have what I would call the wild cards. They're not going to conquer parts of the galaxy, but they can have more significant interaction with factions that will. So you've got, for example, the human resistance fighters just going to come in and help you from outside the gravity well, and that's just a bonus, right? Well, what if you have Dark Spire involved? You might not want them to come and help because you might not want them fighting on planets where Dark Spire are, but you don't get to control that. So they could end up scaling up the Dark Spire more than you want. Or you could get a bunch of them munched by the nanocost. And that could just be a negative. So it could actually be the case under certain scenarios that adding higher intensity human resistance fighters actually makes your game harder rather than easier. But most of the time, that won't be the case. The Astro trains are, higher intensity, more trains, more advanced projects. Risk analyzers, again, more of them, more difficult. You got the time pressure there, so if there are other factions slowing you down, that could be a multiplier effect, but not a great deal of interplay. The Fallen Spire, they're just what they are. The scaling up of the battles in a Fallen Spire game is so significant that they kind of render all the other factions irrelevant. The Dyson Sphere is worth thinking about a bit. Because, just intensity, how much power they're going to have, how many ships they're going to field. But that's another one where if they're near the Dark Spire, that can be an issue. If they're near the nanocost, they can get eaten. If they clear out a bunch of systems around them, maybe that provides an opening for the Marauders. And then also, if you put them at intensity 8 or higher, then you get to deal with Antagonizers. Here's an example of Antagonizer in action. There is one over here in Jacobson. The Dyson Sphere itself is actually up here in Denning, but they are regularly sending ships at us over here. And if we didn't have this help from the HRF, we would be in some serious trouble. You can see the pounding that we're taking. And they will just continually stream, and they will not stop coming until you get rid of that Antagonizer. Then the Macrophage are sort of in their own category all to themselves. Again, you've got the Allegiance, they've got different spawning options. You can see, they can spawn a single one on a bunch of different planets, or just one Tellium somewhere in the galaxy to have a lot more resources, or you can cluster them in groups of 2. But their intensity does some different things as well. Low intensity Macrophage will only stick to about 1 Tellia per system. In the middle, they'll get 2. Up at the higher end, they can build up to 3. And then if you get them up to, I think, about 6 or so, they start using smart expansion concept, where they will look for safer places in the galaxy to cluster and hopefully grow faster. And like the Dyson Antagonizers, that's something that wouldn't necessarily be obvious to you from looking at, the intensity bar. And you really never know what's going to happen with Macrophage. Anyway, if you're going to throw them in, basically be prepared for anything. Usually they're not going to do much, but every once in a while they can really, especially on the higher intensities, take off and be a major force. And then there are the Territorial Factions, which is where it really gets complicated. Marauder, Nanocost, Scourge, and Dark Spire. And basically, if you have multiple of factions in this category together, expect chaos, expect problems, expect multiplying difficulties, particularly if they're hostile. But even if they're friendly, that can just cause the AI to send a bunch of extragalactic war units after them and bog down any expansion for you. It can make it very difficult for you to control the resistance that scales up in the galaxy. So I would really put these 4 under the use at your own risk category and just expect chaos to result. Those of you who have seen the Faction Frenzy playthrough know that there was a big Nanocost infestation, and then I eliminated them, which allowed the Marauders a place to take hold, where the Marauders would not have been able to do anything otherwise. And that was complicated by Dark Spire in the area, which cause them to ramp up. We've got both the intensity here and the, tactician versus brute force. How smart are they? Do they use fire teams? Same thing for Nanocause, which are also special in the sense they've got this control about whether they're going to invade immediately or whether you have to activate them through a beacon. The fact that the Scourge provides such intense time pressure on the player and you have to go get them under control as fast as you possibly can means that any other type of time pressure, such as the risk analyzers, or any of the other territorial factions, is really going to be a big multiplier there. And in general, with the territorial factions here, I would suggest making small changes and additions to things that you've tried before. If you are going for a chaotic game and don't mind getting run over, okay, that's fine. But if not, only add one of them that you're not really experienced with to a game. If you've never played a game with both Scourge and Darkspire, or Marauders and Nanocause, or whatever, just stick with that and don't try to throw a bunch of other things into the mix because you're asking for trouble. So, any further questions about this? Any difficulty aspects that I didn't cover? Any setups you've tried that you thought were particularly good or that you had more trouble with than you thought? Feel free to throw any of those comments down below or on the Discord. And thanks for watching, everybody.